After a night out with friends, you arrive home exhausted, but ultimately satisfied with how everything proceeded. It was a good day, you remark to yourself as you're preparing for bed. However, shortly after arriving home, you receive news that an ailing family member has passed away. This incident wasn't unexpected, as you realize it could have happened any time, but it still comes as a shock, nonetheless. With the day's lighthearted events momentarily forgotten, you can't help but focus on the loss as you crawl into bed and attempt to sleep. Perhaps you reflect on the life of your loved one and the relationship you had with them. Perhaps instead, your thoughts turn to your eventual demise and the great fear which accompanies the realization that someday, you too will pass away. Additionally, there's also a significant worry about what lies beyond. Whether it's a fate of eternal darkness or hellfire, both arouse concern in the mind. Death is perceived as inherently negative because it's the end of life. Pain and suffering may cease, but so will pleasure. You'll be free of pain, but death also deprives us of seeing our loved ones, of getting to live, love, and laugh with them. All of life's detrimental aspects will vanish, but so will the beneficial elements as well. Hence, why death possesses such a negative connotation, because we're robbed of any more time we could possibly have to experience life's pleasures. With all that said, is the fear of death a rational fear? Are there occasions where it becomes irrational to fear death? Phrased differently, is death as negative as it's portrayed to be, and can there be fates worse than death? As we'll come to see, in spite of the fear death causes, it's a necessary component of life. Ultimately, we cannot truly appreciate life without the prospect of death looming sometime down the road. To begin, although the story at the outset of today's discussion is used in an illustrative sense, it happens to be based on events that recently occurred in my life. I arrived home one night after a social event, only to hear that my grandmother passed away. It wasn't totally unexpected, but it was still a shock, like many life-changing events. We weren't particularly close, but her death still saddened me to some extent. I ponder about death on a semi-regular basis, but this event has thrust it to the forefront of my mind. So, as I reflect on circumstances, I figure that now is as good of a time as ever to examine death, the fear of death, and the mystery of what happens afterwards. Beginning with death, it's evidently the natural end of life. When life begins, there's a point where it concludes as well. The saying, "nothing lasts forever," is applicable not only to inanimate objects, but also life itself. A building or an automobile may be brand new at some point, and you can maintain them for a time. Eventually, though, you'll no longer be able to sufficiently preserve them. The building will be deemed unsafe to occupy and therefore must be torn down. As for the automobile, even if you perform a complete overhaul, there will come a time where it won't run anymore. The old kicking a dead horse analogy. Our bodies are the same, brand new when we're born, but eventually they age and break down. Furthermore, not everyone is born in pristine condition, and numerous people deteriorate faster than others. Some perish before they see the light of day, and for many more, they won't be as fortunate as my grandmother, who lived into her late 80s. Such is the nature of life, where we're dealt differing hands, and all we can do is adapt to ever-changing situations. Making the best of circumstances and enjoying the time we have enables us to remain optimistic in the face of death. Continuing on how death is the natural conclusion for life, a comparable metaphor is that of a story or movie. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's also a climax, or multiple climaxes, with rising and falling action. When we read a story or watch a movie, eventually they must come to an end. I doubt any of you will want to read a never-ending story or watch a never-ending movie. Eventually we must retire for the night. The curtain must fall on the production. Furthermore, when these stories end, the conclusions also bestow meaning as they tie all of the loose threads together. Take for example when we endure struggle. We often don't uncover the reasons behind those hardships until they come to pass. What was it all for, you may ask yourself, and the true answer usually doesn't manifest itself until the end of such an ordeal. Just like the characters in stories and movies we cherish, our stories must also come to an end. Death is the natural conclusion to our production, the curtain that falls and lets us ultimately retire into the night, for one last time. Even with these observations, many of us unsurprisingly fear death. But why? One obvious reason is because we're afraid of what lies beyond, the afterlife. The prospect of making it to heaven is evidently positive, A paradise where pain and suffering ceases is ideally what we desire. Yet, it seems that if heaven exists, then hell must also exist, and we evidently don't want to end up in a place of eternal torment. It's certainly justifiable to fear hell, an eternity of suffering, but even an eternity of darkness also invokes comparable sentiments. If the afterlife is similar to prenatal existence, where we lacked consciousness and weren't aware of anything, then this is also disastrous for some. These individuals fear death because it deprives us of consciousness, sentient awareness of our surroundings. Fundamentally, as it's implicitly stated, this fear originates in the realization that we won't be around to experience life's joys. When we die, we'll be deprived of further happy moments. No more laughter, no more birthdays, no more partaking in delicious food, and no more pleasure of any kind. When death looms, there's this evident wish for our time to be prolonged. I wish I can have just a little more time so I can experience this, so I can reach this milestone, etc. The problem with this notion, though, is that you'll never be able to experience everything life has to offer. Take travel, for example. Even with modern technology, you won't be able to travel to every single destination on Earth. Ignoring time, lack of sufficient funds will prevent you from doing so, and even if you possess the money, your limited time would likely prevent you from spending more than a few days at each destination. This is also assuming you possess no other significant endeavors that you'd wish to pursue, like raising a family, and so on. The point is that plenty of experiences can be amassed in life, but not all of them. Ultimately, you have to decide for yourself what is worth pursuing given your limited time. The days may be long, but the years are short, so use them wisely. When you do just that, death is not treated as an enemy to be feared, but rather, an old friend to be welcomed. I'll finish with these remarks. Death may be the end of pleasure, but it's also the end of worldly suffering. Indeed, that's why many welcome death, because they won't have to experience life's traumas anymore. It's evident that being free from suffering is beneficial, but it doesn't always follow that forsaking pleasure is inherently detrimental. Even while we're still living, there are circumstances where pursuing pleasure actually inflicts greater harm on ourselves and others, like feeding an addiction. More often than not, we have to delay gratification in order to manifest objectively better outcomes. Therefore, forsaking immediate pleasure isn't always negative, nor should it always be denoted as such. Whatever lies beyond death is a mystery, and it'll continually be pondered about. Perhaps the only way we'll truly unravel the mystery is when we ourselves reach the other side. In the meantime, while death can be extremely brutal and terrifying, it also serves as a natural conclusion to life. If we lived forever, then the meaning we presently extract from life would be severely diminished, if not vanish altogether. Milestones are significant for a reason, and it's because our time is short. The days are long, but the years are short, and how you use that time matters. Your story is still being written, your movie is still playing on the screen. Eventually, the writing will cease, and the images will fade to black. It's up to you to make your story, your movie, a memorable one, not only for yourself, but for those who care about you as well.